Hi guys, welcome to week 8. For this week, we're going to be covering joints. So, what are our objectives for this week? Well, our first objective is to describe the categories of joints. 2. List the examples of immovable, slightly movable, and freely movable joints. 3. Label the parts of a synovial joint. And 4. State the function of synovial membrane and synovial fluid. So, what is joints? Well, a definition for joints is a joint is the location at which two or more bones articulate or make contact. Some joints, like those of the skull, are fixed and have no movement. Some, like those of the vertebrae, can move slightly, and some are freely movable, like the joints of the limbs. So, moreover, a slighter definition for joints would be area where two bones articulate. Articulate meaning come together. What are two major functions of joints? One, they hold bones together, and two, allows for mobility. Fewer joints produce robot-type motion. Classification of joints. First, their functionally, degree of motion allowed, and two, structurally, it's based on tissue and anatomy of the joint. Classification of joints. We have tissue, which is more common, and they're known as fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial tissue. For movement, we have that they are immovable, slightly movable, and freely movable. All right. So in the classification of joints for movement, you can classify them in three different movement types, which are mentioned here: immovable, slightly movable, and freely movable. And then you can find three types of tissues, and these tissues are fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial tissues. So what are the types of joints? As we mentioned, there are three types of movable joints, right? Or meaning movement of joints. So we're going to go with the first one, which is immovable, which is also known as fixed joints, all right, or fibrous. These joints are held together by tough tissues which develops during childhood, all right. So immovable joints are developed during your childhood time. For example, the cranium, the pelvis, and the vertebrae. So keep that in mind, all right, guys. Slightly movable joints. These are also cartilaginous. Here, movement is needed, but only to a certain degree. Okay, an example would be a vertebral column. Okay, so cartilaginous joints, they have the primary and secondary. The primary are known as chondrosis joints, which are bones that are connected by hyaline cartilage, which allow no movement. Okay, and this FFI seal cartilage of growing bones. Okay, then below you can see an image. Okay, but what's most important for you guys here to remember is the slightly definition, and also if they have movement or if they are limited movement. So let's move to secondary, which is symphysis joint. These bones are connected by white fibrocartilage, and they are limited in movement. Okay, so remember, primary has no movement and secondary has limited movement. No, freely movable joints. These are known as synovial. These joints are also called the synovial and allow the movement to take place. All right. And here is where we come to find that there are six types of freely movable, or also known as synovial joints. To start with these types of synovial joints, as I just mentioned, they are six, all right? And remember that synovial joints fall under freely movable joints, which can be divided into six groups depending on the way they move. And so these six types of synovial joints are: one, ball and socket joint; two, hinge joint; three, pivot joint; four, gliding joint; 5. Saddle joint; and 6. Condyloid joint. Great, so we are moving on to learning what these types of joints are. So we're going to start with ball and socket joint. Well, the ball and socket joint allows the greatest range of movement. Alright? One end of the bone is shaped like a ball and it fits into a hollow socket at the end of another joint, which is held together by ligaments and tendons. Right here to your right, you have an example. We're showing you on the shoulder top, alright? They has two main ball and socket joints, which will be one, the shoulder, and two, the hip joints. Hinge joints. The hinge joints allow extensive flexion and extension. Flexion meaning bending and extension meaning straightening with only a small amount of rotation. These strong ligaments stop the bones from sliding off from one side to the another. An example of the hinge joints would be your elbow and your knee joints, all right? You can clearly get your hand now and then you stretch your hand and then right there you see that the movement happens right in your elbow and it says it has the or allows the extension of flexion and extension, right? Meaning bending and straightening. And with your elbow, you are able to do it, right? It happens also when it comes to your knee joint, okay? Now, pivot joint. Pivot joint allows only rotation around an axis. For example, you can call it a central point. The joint works by the end of one bone having a peg which fits into a ring formed by the other bone. Example between the axis and atlas bone of the neck. This allows us to turn, raise, and lower our heads. So that's what you call the pivot joint, okay? Where you allow these types of movement, and I gave you the example right there, which is with our neck. We are able to turn it to the side, we're able to lower your head, we're able to raise our heads, all right? So keep that in mind, guys. You must learn the differentiation between these types of joints. Gliding joints now. These joints also allow flexion and extension through a slight gliding motion between the end of small bones. And these would be such as example of bones at the base of the hands and feet. Alright? These small bones can move over one another to increase the flexibility of the hands and feet. Strong ligaments link them together and stop them from moving too far. And here you have examples, and you can clearly see where there's a yellow color. It's showing you the gliding joints, all right? Great, we're moving into saddle joints. Well, saddle joints forms between bones whose articulation surfaces have both concave and convex regions. The surface of one bone fits the complementary surface of the other bone. This type of joint permits a variety of movement. Example would be the joint between the trapezium and the metacarpal bones of the thumb. And right here, you can see clearly how it's showing you an example of the saddle joint. Okay, you see the trapezium, and also it labels the metacarpal of the thumb, and it says that it's the joint between the trapezium. Okay, so right here you see like a slight little bluish color. That's where it's referring to. All right, that's where this type of joint, the saddle joint, is formed. Okay. Synovial membrane. Synovial membrane is or makes the synovial fluid, which has a lubricating function. Guys, mind you confuse synovial membrane and synovial fluid, okay? Keep in mind that the synovial membrane is the one that makes the synovial fluid and has a lubricating function, while the synovial fluid, which is also called the synovia, is a viscous non-nutrient fluid which is found in the cavities of the synovial joints. Okay, so remember, the synovial membrane makes the synovial fluid. Now, the synovial fluid is found in the cavities of synovial joints, and it is egg white like consistency. The principal role of the synovial fluid is to reduce friction between the articular cartilage of synovial joints during movement. So, just furthermore, to give a slight definition on synovial membrane and synovial fluid, remember synovial membrane is found inside the joint capsule and creates the synovial fluid, while the synovial fluid is one that nourishes the joints, which removes waste debris and lines in joint cavities. Okay, so thank you guys. We have completed week 8. So have a great weekend, guys.